98.7 FM, W1.1 FM, and anytime on the WBEZ app.
You're listening to Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Coming up on the show, early voting begins in Chicago as J.B. Pritzker and Darren Bailey face off in a heated first TV debate. Several children are among victims of gun violence over the weekend, and the Chicago Red Stars owner is out in the wake of a women's soccer abuse scandal. Those stories and more in our weekly news recap. And you can head over to youtube.com/WBEZ if you want a more visual experience. Our video live stream begins right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The U.S. economy's gained 263,000 jobs. The Labor Department is out with its latest monthly employment report. The gains to payrolls in September were slower than the month before. The cooling demand for workers is actually welcome news for the Federal Reserve, which is trying to curb inflation. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the unemployment rate fell to 3.5%. He explains why.
We saw a big influx of workers in August when nearly 800,000 people joined or rejoined the workforce. But today's report shows, unfortunately, that trend did not continue in September. In fact, 57,000 people dropped out of the workforce last month. That's why the unemployment rate fell to 3.5%, matching a half-century low.
NPR's Scott Horsley reporting. Drug reform advocates are praising President Biden's move to pardon Americans convicted on federal marijuana possession charges. NPR's Eric Westervelt reports those advocacy groups are hopeful Biden's actions will spur similar action at the state level.
The president's move makes good on a campaign pledge reform groups call a long overdue policy change. Eric Altieri is director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Today was a huge step in the right direction, and really a historic move to see coming from a sitting president of the United States.
But the federal pardons impact relatively few Americans. The vast majority of simple pot possession convictions are at the state level, and Biden urged governors to also pardon those convicted of state possession charges. He also called for a review of pot's federal classification. Advocates hope that leads to the repeal of cannabis's current listing as a Schedule I controlled substance alongside heroin and LSD. Eric Westervelt, NPR News.
European Union leaders met today in an informal summit dominated by efforts to reduce both energy prices for consumers and profits for the Russian government to use in its war against Ukraine. Terry Schultz reports there are many divisions among the 27 governments.
EU countries are debating whether and how to put a limit on the amount paid for Russian gas imports, as well as how to deal collectively with soaring energy prices. Germany unilaterally decided to put almost $200 billion into an energy aid package for its citizens, a move criticized by some other countries as damaging to the common market. As leaders discuss a range of ways to help Ukraine and pressure Russia to stop the war, Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin was asked about President Biden's remark as to what Russian President Vladimir Putin's off-ramp might be.
The way out of this conflict is for Russia to leave Ukraine.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine February 24th, Norway has become the EU's biggest gas supplier. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
The Nasdaq Composite Index is now down more than 3.5%. The Dow has fallen more than 2%. S&P is down more than 2.5%. This is NPR News.
It's 53 degrees at 12:04. I'm Araceli Gomez-Aldana with WBEZ News. Republican State Senator Darren Bailey continues punting on some of his more conservative stances to Illinois' Democratic-led state legislature. The gubernatorial hopeful sparred with incumbent J.B. Pritzker during a frantic TV debate at Illinois State University last night on issues ranging from crime to the economy. When asked about his past comments on ending abortion, Bailey said nothing will change if he's governor unless the legislature sends him a bill. He also dismissed his previous votes against gun control measures when asked whether he supports a ban on assault-style weapons and whether school teachers should be armed. Healthcare workers are sounding the alarm about staffing shortages at area hospitals. Nurses, patient techs, housekeepers, and other workers with CEIU Healthcare organized a day of action yesterday at 8 hospitals in the region. They're asking for hospitals to properly staff their facilities and also want higher wages to keep workers from leaving the industry. Taking a look at sports and preseason play, the Chicago Blackhawks lost to Minnesota last night 4-1. In another preseason game for the Chicago Bulls, they host the Denver Nuggets tonight at 7. The Red Stars are off. Chicago Fire FC is off. It's going to be breezy today, high near 53 degrees, and tonight a low around 37. I'm Araceli Gomez-Aldana with WBEZ News.
Support for NPR comes from Insperity, providing HR support for 30-plus years, including access to benefits and HR technology. Insperity's mission is to help businesses succeed so communities prosper. Insperity, HR that makes a difference.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We did it. We made it through a week of twists and turns and stories like these.
Critics of the Safety Act are launching a new attack on the law.
The Chicago Sun-Times has now dropped its paywall.
Controversies in the classroom are spilling over onto the campaign trail.
Governor J.B. Pritzker and his Republican challenger, Darren Bailey, are squaring off over the future of education in Illinois.
The governor's debate starts now.
It's time for our weekly news recap, and here to dive into the week's top local stories is Chicago Sun-Times Washington Bureau Chief Lynn Sweet. Great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Also here, Monica Ng, Axios Chicago reporter. Hi, Monica.
Hey, Sasha.
Good to meet you in person.
Yes.
And we've got David Greising, president of the Better Government Association. Welcome back, David.
Hello, Sasha.
Remember, you can watch us break down the week's news live on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube. Let's say hi. All right, we're going to start with statewide news, first of all. With the election just less than 5 weeks away, the two candidates in the governor's race, they faced off in their first TV debate last night. Did you guys watch?
Indeed.
Indeed, you did. What about you, Monica?
I was hosting an event, but I read all the recaps.
All right, well, let's listen to a little bit of that debate.
Governor Pritzker's obviously lying about everything that he just said.
It's just a lie what Darren Bailey is saying. He's saying we're defunding. He's the one who voted against funding for our state police.
J.B. Pritzker has absolutely failed the people of the state of Illinois.
Well, over and over again, you've heard Darren Bailey lie just for the last 10 minutes of this debate.
Oh, boy. So a little bit of a theme there, I'd say. So each of them is painting the other one as a liar. How do you think that they did, Lynn?
So first of all, my compliments to the moderators of the debate. They had wonderful context and charts explaining the issue when they turned to it, and I think that's important. So I think even with the clashing there, it was a productive debate and getting to see the people and the charges, counter charges, and all that. If we take away that, you did learn about what people did not want to answer is as telling as what they did, especially in an issue, let's just take one, on assault weapons. What we heard and didn't hear from both of them, and we could get into it later if you want, spoke volumes.
Yeah, go ahead now.
So here's the point, and it was asked in the context of the Highland Park massacre, and Governor Pritzker said afterwards we need a statewide assault weapon ban, and he even suggested that the legislature might work on it this summer, which never happened. And he appointed a task force. Well, Bailey then said correctly, you're the governor, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden the legislative process, like, I'm not the legislature, they do their thing, I only urge them, which is not really, it was rhetorical camouflage. And it didn't get done because the bottom line is the Democrats didn't want to vote before the election. And so they're studying it. Now, for his part, Darren Bailey totally evaded the question of an assault weapon ban. And he talked about mental health. And here's the thing. When you talk about the complexity of what to do with mass shootings, one element is mental health. Another is the availability of the weapon. When it comes down to the day of the massacre, if the shooter doesn't have a weapon, then it doesn't happen, no matter the mental health.
Yeah.
And Bailey totally avoided and evaded that. And votes are really binary. In the end, if it comes to the floor, yes or no. If you're a governor, will you sign it or not?
Yeah.
And one thing that struck me as odd when you mentioned this is that they both talked about the legislature as sort of being all-powerful. Even Pritzker, who has a supermajority in both houses, and he's the leader of the party, both made it sound like they can't get things done.
Or that they have no veto power. I mean, why didn't someone say, well, if it hits your desk, would you veto it?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So there were, I think So I think in that one exchange, it was instructive that it didn't get done this summer, but will it get done now would have been my follow-up question. Like, I understand the reality of not wanting to vote before the election. That follow-up would have been, and I don't know all the rules of the debate when I saw it because they vaulted to Bailey next, would have been, so in the veto session, what do you want to have happen?
Right.
Are you talking to Senate Leader Harman? Are you talking to House Leader Welch? Are you talking to Representative Bob Morgan, who's leading the task force? What's the deal? And you do have some sway here. And then to Bailey. So if you were to be governor, it is likely with a Democratic House and Senate if it went to your desk. Would you sign it or not?
Yeah. And do you really think that the FOID card law needs to be removed, given that FOID, even as it is today, was too weak to stop the Highland Park shooter?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's stick with the governor's race for a moment longer. A private school that was started by Darren Bailey and his wife in 2016. It's coming under more scrutiny. Let's hear a little bit of what WGN's Tamon Bradley asked about last night.
Senator Bailey, your school, Full Armor Christian Academy, has a sign on its doors warning people that staff are heavily armed and any attempt to harm children will be met with deadly force. Senator, do you want to arm all Illinois teachers? 30 seconds, please.
Well, first and foremost, that school's not political, and I'm not dragging it into this campaign. Secondly, that would be up to the General Assembly of whether or not they would want to support such a measure.
All right, David, what do we know about this school?
Well, the school uses a curriculum that is published by Bob Jones University that in the past has defended slave owning, defended the Ku Klux Klan, spoke positively about the Ku Klux Klan. They have moderated their texts somewhat, but nevertheless, there is still leading questions about what are the strengths of the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, which treated black people as if they were 3/5 of a human being in counting them enslaved people, et cetera. So it's clear that the curriculum is ultra-conservative. That's the sort of people who are going to go to that school. And it just sort of bespeaks since it is a school run by or controlled by Darren Bailey and his wife, it speaks to what their fundamental beliefs are about some of the social and historical issues, especially critical race theory, is going to go nowhere near that school. And that also bespeaks sort of what Darren Bailey would seek possibly statewide.
May I add one other thing?
Sure.
So that school is the subject of an ad by Governor Pritzker that documents everything that was said in the debate. And I think as an ad goes, it is effective in making an argument that this is what Bailey, when given, this is what he did. And that's all we're kind of looking for in some of these discussions and even analysis of the ads. And in the asking of the question, I think when he says, I don't want that to be political, I just want to point out, in an election, you don't get to pick and choose.
Right.
The school I have with a very defined curriculum is off.
It's going to be
this is on.
The curriculum is about as political as one can get.
Yeah.
So to keep this school out of politics is just sort of disingenuous.
Well, Monica, I want to pivot to something else that came up a lot this election. Last night, the crime reform bill known as the Safety Act, right? You've been looking into one of the more controversial elements of it, and that's the cash bail piece, the elimination of cash bail. What have you found out?
Well, I found out it's pretty divisive. So the Pretrial Fairness Act that goes into effect in January would eliminate cash bail in favor of pretrial detention hearings, where a judge has to hear the prosecutor and the defense say, here's why my client should be free while they await trial or shouldn't be free. And it's some people, it's been defined as the purge. It's going to let all these criminals out on the street. Well, supporters say, no, this will be a transparent process where a judge has to say, here is why I agree with the prosecutor that this person has to stay based on X, Y, Z, or not. And in the past, there's no law that's exactly the same, but New Jersey's law is very similar. In the past, that has kept more people in jail who are charged with serious crimes and fewer who are charged with lesser crimes. Clearly, Governor J.B. Pritzker feels like that's going to be the outcome here in Illinois, where he says, this is going to keep rapists and murderers and domestic abusers in jail, but, let the mom who shoplifted diapers and formula, go home and take care of her child.
Yeah.
When we quoted that, one person wrote to me saying, well, she'd have to shoplift $300 or more for that to be considered a felony. And you can parse words on this, but the data does indicate that this will have that effect. How it really pans out in January, it's unclear.
Oh, my goodness. Do you think we'll continue to see calls for changes to this law?
I think we will. And I think that both Kwame Raoul, Attorney General, and the governor have said, look, we expect changes. In the veto session, we're going to be making amendments to this. It's not a perfect law. It's 760-something pages.
Yeah.
And they're open to it. But I've talked to some state's attorneys who are like, just making changes is like putting a new heart in a corpse. So some people aren't open to tweaks.
Yeah.
Others are.
It was a little surprising last night that Governor Pritzker, when given a chance, didn't say, here's what could be changed. For example, the flight risk ruling, which basically the judges would not be allowed to take into consideration a defendant's prior history of flight. Only
or non-appearance in court.
An immediate intent to flee if released. And that's universally agreed. Probably that needs to be adjusted. And it was disappointing that Governor Pritzker last night wasn't prepared to say, here's one or two things that perhaps could be changed.
If I may add, though, as we look into the politics of the Safety Act, I think it is so unknown to voters. It is something new that it's very easy to demagogue and misrepresent because it hasn't happened yet. And I think in the weeks to come, even though we're speaking as early voting has started, I would not be surprised to see more and more a reference to it, because the Safety Act now is also shorthand for the Republican accusation that Democrats are soft on crime. And I think that's the code now. It's not even a code. It's just that's what it means. So the nuances and the changes, the tweaks will be lost in the conversation.
Yeah. I want to turn to gun violence. Tragically, 2 young children were among the latest victims last weekend. A 3-year-old who died in a road rage incident, and 7-year-old who was wounded on his way to church. That weekend, violence left actually 34 people shot, 5 fatally. Then there was a shooting inside the 10th District Police Station on Ogden Avenue Wednesday, which follows another recent shooting inside a West Side police station. What happened at the 10th District Station, Monica?
Well, it appears someone walked in. They had a gun, allegedly had a gun in a plastic bag, and allegedly made threats and said they were going to shoot. Police officers shot that person. We're told non-fatally that it's not serious. And again, when we report these things, we have to say the police said. But it's, I haven't been in a police station recently, but I have been in Chicago Public Schools. All our kids went there, and you have to go through metal detectors. Do they not have those at the doors of police stations?
I haven't been to one lately, but I don't know. But good question. Is Superintendent Brown saying that he's going to increase security at police stations?
Yeah. So he said he's looking into other things. He said some police stations have higher desks or glass at the front, and these are things that they're thinking of. But yeah, this being the second one in a week.
Right.
It's like, okay, why are people targeting police stations? Why isn't there better safety there? And what will the superintendent do?
Yeah. Lynn, I want to turn to another very different story. The Sun-Times had a big announcement yesterday. The paper's content's now going to be free to read online. What are you hearing in the newsroom?
We're excited. This is all part, so our listeners know this is part of our new partnership with WBEZ. It's part of Chicago Public Media. And now that we are a nonprofit, we are switching to a member model. And if you go to suntimes.com/member, you can become a founding member of the Chicago Sun-Times, and you will get all the instructions you need on how to sign up for that, and we appreciate your support. Because part of being a nonprofit is making our material free and accessible to everybody. And the big thing you get, by the way, when you become a Sun-Times member, you get access to our e-edition, which is a online replica of the print paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very cool thing.
Like
to
a
have.
PDF?
It's a PDF, yes. I'm based in Washington. It's the first thing I read every day is to see the online version of the print paper because it gives you a feel for it. So that's a very big perk you get in being a member.
But do we get dinner with you, Lynn?
Well, actually, to everyone who's listening.
No, it's a trip.
Everyone who's listening, I'm happy. I'm all in on this. So if anyone wants to be a member who's listening and you want to have coffee with me, my offer is out there. I'll meet you. I'm serious.
Amazing.
There's going to be a line out the door by the time we get out of the
I'll
studio.
be happy to do it. My email is lsweet@suntimes.com.
I love it.
I'll do anything to help the cause. But everybody is optimistic. We had a great first day. More than 500 people became members. There is a big push. As you know, we have a thriving, independent, nonprofit journalism community in Chicago. We are, in a sense, blessed with so many publications and journalism outlets. And we stand in a big community with lots of choices, and we're asking people to support all the journalism in Chicago.
Well, speaking of all the publications, I'm thinking of David because you've spent decades working at Chicago newspapers, including the Sun-Times. How big of a deal is this to you?
Oh, it's really exciting. It's great to have that great content available without a paywall. And we're seeing more and more the cooperation between the newsrooms, the Sun-Times and WBEZ newsroom. Education coverage in particular, they've come out with some great in-depth reporting that's taking up pages and pages of the Sun-Times print edition. It's really, really good stuff. And especially when we were talking earlier about the Safety Act, and there's these fake newspapers out there that are attacking.
Are they still out there?
They're still out there, unfortunately, and they're attacking the Safety Act and other kind of dog whistle topics in Illinois politics. And to have a strong newsroom at the Sun-Times and here at WBEZ, Better Government Association, my organizations, doing factual reporting that you can trust is just so important. It's going to be interesting to see how much pressure it puts on the Chicago Tribune because they're now the only, well, I guess Block Club also has
Cranes.
a paywall. Right, and Cranes. Okay, so we still have a few who have paywalls.
Yeah.
But now that you can get a really good content for free, it's going to put pressure on some of these others. It'll be interesting to see how they respond.
Dale Chi-Town, who's watching us right now on YouTube, says, I subscribe to the Sun-Times and I get the e-paper every day and the print edition 4 days a week. Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. On the heels of the Sun-Times announcement, we also learned that Alden-Capital, that's the second largest newspaper publisher in the country, and they're the owner of the Trib, will no longer allow its newspaper to make endorsements for president, governor, or Senate races. Quickly, everyone's thoughts on this, because we were kind of blown away this morning in our meeting.
Weird.
So they're going to do this, I guess, after this upcoming election?
Yes, because we're already too knee-deep in this season.
Right. So they have the option to do it. We're now the Sun-Times, a nonprofit, and that's the reason we don't. It is, I actually, given Alden and everything, it sounds to me more that it is, they put some highfalutin language in that seems to me just to mask that they don't feel like doing the work to do endorsements.
It sounds to me like they're in this super divided country that you have a lot to lose by coming down for, let's say, a Trump versus a Biden. And it's like, why bother?
Well,
were you shocked? You worked at the Tribune for years.
Of course, but to Lynn's point, it takes so much work to do those endorsements, and it probably is an economy measure as much as anything else. And when you think about how important the Sun-Times endorsement was of Lori Lightfoot in the last mayoral election in 2019, but for that endorsement, she probably would not have made the runoff. She probably would not be the mayor today. And so the civic discussion is going to lose a very important voice.
So no newspaper will make these endorsements anymore?
Cranes will be the only one left making endorsements in this market. And newspaper endorsements, some people have said they no longer have influence, but we saw in the Lightfoot case, they really do. So
forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go for it, Lynn.
Their endorsements matter in races that people don't already have a lot of high information on. So I think in the when you vote for president, maybe if somebody doesn't have enough information by the time you go to vote,
Yeah.
wow, you have not been awake.
Not been paying attention.
Even in the governor's race. But let's go lower down the ticket. Who is focusing on the treasurer's race, controller's race?
Yeah.
Or even on some of our...
But will they be abstaining that low,
Yeah.
or is it just higher ones?
No, it's all. And actually, it takes more work to do the lower races because there's an abundance of information out there about Bailey and Pritzker. But you try and
I
you
remember
go to those lower races. You have people running who it's not even clear what they do for a living.
And then they won't fill out the forms. I remember my old friend Cornelia Grumman when she was on the editorial board, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I've got 10 million interviews with all these candidates today, and I got to sort through what's fact and fiction."
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot of work for all those lower.
And
down
I
in the
did that.
ticket.
I used to help the editorial board of the Sun-Times years ago, and I talked to everybody. I checked out everything. I was consumed day and night with it, and this is one thing, if we had, could be useful to our listeners here. When you look at the candidates' websites and you look at the biographies, look at what's not there.
Right.
Okay.
That's
a
good
lot
point.
of times people don't even make it clear what they do for a living. Somebody is a committed neighborhood volunteer. When somebody doesn't put down basics about themselves, then just realize that and do a little more digging or find out.
Yeah.
But now it's up to the readers to do that on their own, whereas, as you all pointed out, that was a huge amount of work. It didn't look like it was two or three paragraphs about a local race, but every one of those people had to be interviewed knowledgeably by a journalist. And the numbers in the editorial room, say, of the Chicago Tribune, which is owned by Alden, they're probably less than a third of the size that they were pre-Alden. And so there just aren't enough bodies
So
anymore.
I'm getting clarification here. It is our understanding is that they are only passing on endorsements for the higher races: president, governor, senate.
And so I stand by my accusation that you have a lot of people you're going to alienate if you come down on one side on some of those bigger ones, and they're like, why do we need to lose readers?
All right, let's take a pause here. We'll pick up the weekly news recap in just a moment. That's Monica Ng of Axios, Lynn Sweet of the Chicago Sun-Times, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. But first, let's check back in with Araceli Gomez-Aldana. Unionized faculty and staff at city colleges of Chicago, they voted to authorize a strike if a contract deal isn't reached soon. Araceli?
Thanks, Sasha. That's right. And the move was announced yesterday outside of City College's board meeting at Harold Washington College in the Loop. Demands include smaller class sizes, student supports, and raises. And now negotiations continue in the coming weeks. We will follow this story here on WBEZ. The 44th Chicago Marathon, it's on Sunday. Road closures have already begun ahead of the event. The 40,000-person race will include runners from more than 100 countries. One runner told WBEZ he hopes the race shows people the beauty of all of Chicago's neighborhoods. Good luck to the marathon runners. I'm Araceli Gomez-Aldana in for Lisa Labus. Today, this is WBEZ.
On last week's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, Dulce Sloan wished for a different kind of meat.
Listen, after eating chicken enough times, you're like, bro, I get it.
I'm Peter Sagal. Try Wait, Wait this week with special guest Ralph Macchio. It tastes like a news quiz. Join us for Wait, Wait from NPR. Saturday at 10 and again Sunday morning at 11 on WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by Foreman School, a Connecticut co-ed college prep school dedicated to empowering students with learning differences and executive function delays. Fall open house is Monday, October 10th. Information at formanschool.org.
WBEZ is supported by ComEd. The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program has a range of offerings designed to help reduce energy use. Learn more at comed.com/home savings. ComEd, powering lives.
This is Kai Wright. I grew up in the Black church, and my favorite part of service was the fellowship. Hugs and winks, and just check-ins with all these people. I want to create that fellowship on the radio. Every Sunday evening, I hope you'll join me for Notes from America, a live national show. It's a place we can gather to share experiences, process, and figure out where this country is going together. Join me and join the conversation. That's Sunday evening at 5 on WBEZ.
It's clearing up today after the morning rain. High around 53 degrees and breezy. Temperatures are expected to fall into the low to mid 30s and upper 20s across most of the area. Watch out for frost. This is 91.5 WBEZ.
Back now with more Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, it's our weekly news recap where we make sense of the top local and state stories. Now, before the break, we took a deep dive into the governor's race and last night's debate, but there is much more to get to.
Run, Chuy, run. That's the message from the Latino Leadership Council to U.S. Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia as Chicago's mayoral race heats up.
Chicago environmental justice and housing groups are urging Mayor Lori Lightfoot to comply with a federal investigation into zoning laws.
Cook County is accepting applications for its Guaranteed Income Pilot Program.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot proposes a budget she hopes will carry her to a second term.
With us is Chicago Sun-Times Washington Bureau Chief Lynn Sweet, Monica Eng, Chicago reporter for Axios, and David Greising, president of the Better Government Association. All right, Mayor Lightfoot unveiled her nearly $16.5 billion budget for next year. Let's hear a little bit more on what she had to say on Monday.
But as you know, budgets are not just math problems. They are and must be value statements. Value statements about how and why we invest, and importantly in this city, where we invest.
What were the main takeaways of her budget speech, David?
Well, I think the mayor made a good point there because you can just drown in all the numbers in a budget. And so the best way to think about them is to understand what does this say about this mayor and what she is trying to accomplish. And in this case, she made room for a $242 million payment toward pensions that was not required of the city. Mm-hmm. That's a strong statement there, and it's an important one. She also noted that she's got $1.9 billion in COVID relief, which is just great for all of us, but it also raises questions about, okay, next year if those COVID monies dries up, what does the city look like, and what sort of answers does the mayor and those who will be running against her have for the future of the city's economics? A really notable one, probably the most interesting, is that she decided not to go ahead with a property tax increase. Mm-hmm. Last year, the mayor made a big deal out of saying, you know what, we need to tie property tax increases to inflation because otherwise it's such a political issue. Inflation's pretty steady these days, around 2-3%, so everything will be good. Well, inflation is now up around 8%. Her increase was capped at 5%. That would have led to an $85 million increase in property taxes as she heads into an election next year. We already knew that it was going to be reduced to $43 million. And in her speech, she said, hey, you know what? Never mind on the property tax increase. I want to be reelected for mayor. I don't think she said the I want to be reelected for mayor part, but she did say never mind.
But Lynn, does it seem pretty clear that this is an election year budget?
Yes. And I want to amplify what David said is the point. And also, again, so our listeners know, this is just, I got my first beat covering Cook County government and property taxes. So we all bear with me one moment here. What we're talking about was a levy, which was just the request for property taxes. It doesn't mean that everybody would pay that much more because it depends what the tax base is after, put on a seatbelt, something called equalization. So we're not, with my point being, even if it had been in there, it would not have meant necessarily that residential property owners would have paid that much more because it depends on what our whole tax base is in Chicago. It also depends when people look at their whole bill, by the way, the whole bill, what the other taxing units are asking in their levy. So all this to say, when you talk about putting in a levy and then you take it out and you're a few months before an election, I think I'm safe in joining a group analysis perhaps. Yes, that's a political move. All in favor, say aye.
Well, one interesting addition to next year's budget is $5 million to help pay for the cost of migrants who are arriving here in Chicago. Yes. Do we think most voters will be okay with that?
Seems like a pretty small amount for a sanctuary city.
$5 million, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a tiny amount, but it's also a bit of a statement also about Mayor Lightfoot, Governor Pritzker, governors and mayors in other liberal enclaves are pushing back against Governor Greg Abbott of Texas and Governor Rick DeSantis of Florida, who's trying to jump on, even though he doesn't really have an immigration concern.
He brings them to his state, then he flies them out.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just it's a political issue, and it's a way to make a point.
Is it a budget that most alderpersons are going to be okay approving?
I think the elimination of the property tax is going to help her a lot.
Yeah.
We had already seen Brendan Riley of the 42nd Ward complain about this automatic property tax increase. He tried to get an ordinance passed a few weeks ago. It didn't go anywhere, but he had made his point, and it's pretty certain this budget will pass pretty much intact.
Yeah. Well, Monica, while the budget address was going on, there were protests from housing and homelessness activists who set up a tent city in City Hall. What do they want?
Well, they want to see the mayor put a real estate transfer tax on all properties over $1 million, 1.9%. They said that could raise about $160 million for subsidized housing, more mental health facilities, more homelessness prevention. The mayor, I believe, has about $10 million that she's devoted to that. So 160 versus 10. And they believe she hasn't done enough. And they pointed out that the recent census studies really undercounted in their eyes the homeless, unhoused population of Chicago because they didn't count people who were doubled up, for instance.
Yeah,
this is the sort of issue that could really bite her if, say, Chuy Garcia does enter the race and run against her. Given his progressive credentials, she was perceived as a progressive when she was elected in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
The progressives have been, among others, among the most disappointed in her track record to this point, and that the issue that Monica just talked about is definitely a litmus test issue for her.
Lynn, what do you think? Will we see Chuy Garcia enter the race?
When I talked to him about it, he said he will decide by mid-October.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. And again, we're in a real hectic political environment where people are passing petitions for the February municipal elections at the same time which are nonpartisan, and it's just if no one gets 50% plus one, then it's a runoff. So among the things Garcia has going for him is he doesn't have to, because it's an odd year election, he will not lose his congressional seat. Oh. So he doesn't lose anything.
Yeah.
The alder people who are running are giving up seats to do that. If anyone else who is a state rep who has a 2-year term, they are giving up something. He also starts with with a robust campaign war chest and a nationwide network of fundraising. What he does not have by waiting is this Chicago Teachers Union has already come out with an endorsement.
Oh, yeah.
And that would be, the CTU is a powerful political organization, and for them not to wait when it's still, in my analysis, is pretty early, spoke volumes, and I don't know how this will influence Garcia, but it certainly isn't the clear path he might want if he runs, but not enough to have him not do it if that's what's in his heart.
David, yesterday, Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle released her budget for next year. Are Chicagoans going to be happy?
Well, it's an $8.7 billion budget. Toni Preckwinkle has a pretty good track record of running a fairly economically sound county. In her budget, there's $270 million of COVID funds, again, raising the question about what happens going forward. There's nothing in there that looks like it'll be a litmus test issue. Her pensions are much better funded than the Chicago pension funds, and that's something that she made a point to boast about, that she's made significant progress.
And there's no tax or fee increases here, it seems, right?
Not even a soda tax increase. I guess she learned her lesson on that one.
Interesting. Well, $42 million out of that budget was set aside for the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program. I'm looking at you, Monica. The county started accepting applications yesterday, from what I know. Who's eligible, though?
Well, you have to be about 250% of the poverty level. Everybody knows that number, right?
Yes.
So to translate that, household of one would be $33.9 thousand a year. Household of four, you could make up to $69.3 thousand a year. And then you'd be eligible for this $500 a month. This money is, again, coming from COVID funds from the ARPA Act. So how long that's going to last is
it's $500 a month for 2 years.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Preckwinkle said that the program is, quote, the largest publicly funded guaranteed income initiative in American history. Are you expecting it to get national attention, Lynn?
Yes, there are certain stories that do start here. Let's say in Evanston, that started with reparations. Right. I mean, there is a theme here of trying to of addressing equity issues, and this is one of them. So, yes, it will be a national story in how in the various chapters as it goes along. The main question here is, will it make a difference? Will it have any permanent change? And what will people do when they have to be weaned off it? Because the COVID funds that we have coming might be a once-in-a-generation boom. City budgets, state budgets, but it's not replenishable.
Yeah.
So these are all, yes, I'm sure not only will we as journalists be studying this, but if we were starting out in school now, this would be what we would do our sociology papers on or do our doctorate research on, and following these families, because that's just the question. What's it going to do? Now, I understand when you give the $500 to somebody who is at income levels below what you talk about, and it's going to be harder, perhaps, to study at somebody with the higher income level in terms of what is the difference. Do you move? Do you get yourself a 2-year lease that you can't renew because you don't have the $500? And then what do you do? So all these are questions, as I think we as a community are looking for permanent answers to some of these long-running issues.
A reminder, we are online. You can watch the weekly news recap live on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also leave us a comment or question. Talk to us in that YouTube chat box, and I may just read what you have to say about these stories on the air. Over to you again, Monica. 25th Ward Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez joined activists at a press conference this week. They were accusing the city of environmental racism. What are the details?
This all goes back to that leaked HUD letter that said that the Lightfoot administration and the zoning laws are discriminatory, and that the city risks losing millions in funding if it doesn't reform those. These activists said, "Hey, what happened? Did you reform them?" The Lightfoot administration says they're confident they would win this in court. Lightfoot has called the charges absurd. So it sounds like they're trying to bring up the subject again and get it moving and say, really, you're willing to risk these millions for all sorts of important projects because you just want to pretend that this is not true?
Do you think, David, that the city could be at real risk of losing millions in federal funding over this?
I think given the track record, possibly. They did decide not to move forward with certification for the General Iron Shredder on the south side, which is, I think, an indication possibly of moving toward getting this resolved. The money at issue that Monica's referencing is really significant, $375 million in 2021. That's a lot of, even on a budget that we're talking about, that's a significant amount of money. And I think also just going back to the mayor's standing with the people who put her in office, a lot of these people are former Lightfoot voters on the South Side who have valid concerns about this environmental, what some people call environmental racism. It's certainly inequitable. I don't know if it's racist or not, but it certainly is inequitable, the way that the burden of environmental degradation falls on people in poorer communities.
Before we wrap this portion of the news recap, New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman's new book about Donald Trump, it included a few interesting stories that were involving Illinois politicians. Can you give us the quick scoop there? As I see you flipping your pages.
So I looked at Maggie's book. Maggie, by the way, will be in Chicago on her book tour later in October, and I'll have an opportunity to be talking to her. And one of the things that I looked at when I look for the local angles is how Rod Blagojevich, we all know he was, his 14-year sentence was commuted. But what we didn't know is that one key advisor to President Trump said you should make that a second-term item, which, if Trump had listened to his advisor, would mean that Blagojevich still would have been there. The other thing I thought was telling is how Maggie's book is really more a biography in the sense of a man she knows well and has covered in her experience as a New York street reporter, and he is a New York real estate developer. And she tells this tale that he was trying to do a deal for a casino outside of Gary. And we live here, and we know Gary's close, but it's not adjacent to Chicago.
Right.
So we make a distinction. So, and if you live in the south suburbs, going to Gary isn't far, but it's not adjacent. You can't say it. So he wanted to have his people make a map that showed the site as being adjacent to Chicago. And he said, well, no one outside of Chicago will know the difference. And
did he use a Sharpie when he read through these borders?
Right. So, and actually what David's referring to is a famous episode in the Trump presidency where he used a Sharpie to revise
I remember that.
a hurricane map to correct the map so it goes with some misstatement he made. Now, there were other things in there that we consider local because it has to do with Barack Obama, and it just talks about the whole rise of birtherism and also how the mainstream media, which was so enamored with Trump, just let it go and gave him attention on it. And there were some things that that weren't local, but were kind of, a look if you want to know that inside his bathroom in the White House, he put in Trump Hotel toiletries.
Oh, boy. All right. On that note, Lynn Sweet of the Chicago Sun-Times, Monica Ng of Axios, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. We'll be back with more of the weekly news recap in just a moment. But first, Illinois Congresswoman Cheri Bustos is on a tour to discuss a new federal protection against workplace sexual harassment. Here's Araceli.
That's right, Sasha. The new law bars companies from forcing workers who report incidents to meet with a mediator. Bustos says the tour is to ensure that workers are aware of that change. And joining her on the tour is Tanuja Gupta, who led a 2018 walkout of Google employees over forced arbitration. And have you been outside? Cooler weather is here. The National Weather Service says temperatures are expected to fall into the 20s and 30s across most of northern Illinois and northwest Indiana. That's tonight into tomorrow morning, and the drop could result in widespread frost. I'm Araceli Gomez-Aldana in for Lisa Labez. This is 91.5 WBEZ.
On the next Science Friday, New York follows California's lead, passing regulations which will gradually phase out all gas-powered cars by 2035.
We were the first jurisdiction in the United States to have codified an executive order I put out 2 years ago.
As more and more Americans demand electric cars, how can the power grid handle the load? Some answers and your questions on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
This afternoon at 1 on WBEZ Chicago. WBEZ is supported by Lewis University's Grows Institute, presenting Valerie Kaur's See No Stranger, Revolutionary Love on October 20th at the Romeoville campus and virtually. Details at lewisu.edu.
WBEZ is supported by Woodlands Academy of the Sacred Heart. In an atmosphere of strong academic inquiry, Woodlands strives to curate a personalized experience where each student thrives. Open house October 16th. More at woodlandsacademy.org.
WBEZ is supported by Goodman Theater, presenting Swing State, a contemporary portrayal of America's heartland, from Pulitzer Prize finalist Rebecca Gilman and Tony Award-winning director Robert Falls through November 13th. GoodmanTheater.org.
Peter Sagal here from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me with a reminder that you can support public radio by giving a large gift, a gigantic one you might not be able to afford. Or instead, you could donate a vehicle you no longer need. Your choice.
Find out how at wbez.org/car.
It's 53 degrees. You're listening to 91.5 WBEZ.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we are back with more of our weekly news recap. Before the break, we talked about the mayor's proposed budget for next year, but we still have more to get to. We're still live right now on YouTube and Facebook. And with us is Chicago Sun-Times Washington Bureau Chief Lynn Sweet, Monica Ng of Axios, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. All right, Monica, the owner of the Chicago Red Stars women's soccer team is stepping away after a scathing report. Tell us what the report said.
It looked into allegations of abusive behavior and sexual misconduct in women's professional soccer, and Chicago was one of the highlights of the report. It was done by Sally Q. Yates, who did the independent investigation, and so Whistler, is it Whistler, Weisler,
Arnim Whistler.
Whistler,
yeah,
who owner and chairman of the board, said he's going to step down.
Wow. Yeah, it comes after Sally Yates' independent investigation into allegations of past abusive behavior, sexual misconduct. I think the most surprising for me here with this story was just how many years, decades this had gone on, how many teams these different coaches had been able to move to over the years, and nothing happened just because of, players feeling like they had to be silent all this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real groundbreaker, but
very
yeah,
sad.
I mean, you have to wonder, why weren't these allegations taken more seriously before? Why did it take so long and for this report to come out?
Yeah. In other news, news came this week of a company packing its bags. Tyson Foods moving 500 corporate jobs from Chicago and Downers Grove to Arkansas. What reason did they give for leaving?
Well, they're consolidating operations at their corporate headquarters. Chicago's not the only city that will be losing employees, but it falls into the context of we've seen Citadel, Boeing, Caterpillar, also Decamp from Chicago. And we all have to keep in mind what the chairman of McDonald's, Chris Konsinski, said at an economic club speech a few days ago, that Chicago is a city in crisis. And he expanded it beyond what we think of these things a lot of times as just corporate jobs. He talked about McDonald's and all of its stores and the sense of a lack of safety in its stores across the city. And many of these, Ken Griffin at Citadel, when Citadel pulled out, talked a lot about a sense of a lack of safety. The Candidacy comments were really powerful because of that, the way he talked about how it's reaching throughout the city.
Yeah.
And so there is a problem. Chicago has a reputational problem. There recently was good news with Google doubling down on its investment in Chicago, but that's overwhelmed by these number of high-profile
Well, you mentioned Citadel, Boeing, Caterpillar. They've all announced that they're moving. How concerned should we be at this point? How much of this is just normal corporate changes, or are we looking at a worrisome trend for this city?
Well, I was a business journalist for many, many years. This is not normal. And it also is not normal when you have people like Ken Griffin saying we're leaving in part because we don't like the city and state's finances, but my employees don't feel safe and I'm having a hard time recruiting.
Yeah.
And when you see a trend like this, it's not just one-offs. The mayor says, well, wait a minute, 173 companies have either moved to Chicago or expanded operations here. She has a point, but when you see these marquee names go, you can't ignore it and shouldn't ignore it.
Well, Tyson Foods may not think so, but lots of other people think that Chicago is number one.
Like Condé Nast Traveler.
We've been named the best big city in the U.S. This is for the 6th year in a row. Any idea how this ranking is actually determined, though, Lynn?
No, but let's take the good news when we get it.
It's readers. Readers vote on it. I reported on this last year. I remember waking up at 6 a.m. for the big announcement. I'm like, okay, I'll write the story.
That's the kind of dedication one expects.
6 a.m.
Condé Nast Traveler readers like us. And, I don't always want to sound like, I'm a big cheerleader for Chicago. But I love it. And okay, so is Tyson saying, Downers Grove, these guys are leaving Downers Grove for Arkansas because Downers is so dangerous and they hate it so much?
Not so much.
Yeah, so I don't know. Travelers like us, and
and that you bring and I'm glad we're pairing these stories together because it shows there's not one headline when it comes to Chicago. I know that when the Tysons made the announcement, national outlets all said another company moving for Chicago. What's up? And that's true, but whatever comes to a corporate decision, especially if you're not in the city and you're in Downers Grove, for heaven's sakes, is not the same decisions you make to come to a city on the lake that is a tourist mecca in the world where you get the big city benefits of a city on a beach that's walkable and, unlike New York, does not put its garbage on its street.
Yeah, I jumped in the lake. I was on Belmont Rocks swimming and sunning 2 days ago.
It's a great place to live. It's a great place to vacation, but yet we can't look aside from some of the issues that we face.
Yeah, true.
And not just in any single neighborhood in Chicago. It's really spread across the city at this point. And so we're all aware of that. It doesn't discount the fact, yes, it's a spectacular place. It's one of the great cities in the world. There's no doubt. But let's be realistic about the problems with it.
Well, our friend Dale Chi-Town on YouTube says, I feel bad for those Tyson employees that have to move from Chicago to Arkansas. So I think Dale agrees with you all.
Dale has a very good
say?
point. There's not a city in Arkansas that compares to Chicago, even with all the problems we have.
All right. Well, if anyone's looking for another reason to sing the praises of this great city, we're about to kick off a citywide karaoke contest. What is this all about, Monica?
It's called Chicago Sings Karaoke Competition.
And where do I sign up?
Well, just go to the city's website. They're starting the competitions at bars. It's for 21 years and older on Sunday, and there'll be consecutive days. And you have to go out there with your best song. Today in our Axios Chicago newsletter, Justin Kaufman, my co-writer, who considers himself a karaoke expert, gives you all your tips.
I'll challenge him.
He is. There's no doubt.
He says,
So, Sasha, what's your walk-up song?
It's probably "I Will Always Love You" by Whitney Houston. It's a big one.
Well, that's what Justin says. He says, do not try Whitney. He said, even if you think...
He hasn't heard my Whitney.
He is an expert.
Tell Justin to call me.
He said
In the moments we have left, Sasha, can you give us a sample?
Absolutely not. I love these listeners too much.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it'll be fun. In the city, it seemed like they kind of just pulled it out of their hat.
And what did they win?
$5,000.
Wow,
Ooh.
that's good.
You going to be singing
what about
along?
you guys?
Yeah. Are
Jane?
you singing, Lynn?
Lynn, what? I'm Patsy Cline crazy, always.
I will. Well, my walk-up song will be "Sweet Home Chicago." That's what I do.
Okay.
What I'll say is
do
it was
that.
odd last night that Governor Pritzker had no idea, and during the debate
good
was
point.
asked, what's your walk-up song? And Governor Pritzker had no idea what his walk-up song should
So walk-up
be.
song meaning when you go up to bat or when you go up to sing karaoke?
Well, for me, it'll
Either
be
one.
both.
Good question.
That is my. I'll take it for both.
I was interviewing Rick Bayless last night and Beverly Kim, and she says she always does like a Prayer by Madonna. She's a chef, and Rick Bayless says he would do Like a Virgin. We were all naming our karaoke song.
Your favorite Madonna welcome.
yes.
Yeah.
In the seconds we have left, one final story here. Some more good news that we got this week, Monica, from the Paws Animal Shelter. Tell us what their staff was up to.
Well, they went down to Florida and they got more than 50 pups who were in shelters. They weren't, in homes that had been damaged, but the shelters, some of them lost their roofs. And so actually it's a pretty normal thing to bring, especially large dogs from the south to the north and then do vice versa. Small dogs from the south. They like big dogs in the south. They like small dogs in the north. And but this was particularly connected to Hurricane Ian.
Wow, yeah, they drove to the Gulf Coast and they picked up more than 50 cats and dogs from local shelters. That's really sweet.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
Paws being a no-kill, they say they're going to find a forever home for all of them.
Yeah, I think they will. Monica Ng of Axios, Lynn Sweet of the Chicago Sun-Times, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, that's it for Reset. The show is produced by Meha Ahmed, Haima De Medici, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, Andrea Guthman, and Andrew Merriweather. Dan Tucker is our executive producer. Dave Miska, Ethan Schwab, and Haley Bloomquist were our engineers this week. Now, Monday on the show, what is the best way to teach Indigenous history to kids and adults? We're going to check in with an expert from Northwestern. Plus, Dr. Taramina will be back to answer your latest COVID-19, flu, monkeypox, and more questions. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you for listening and have yourselves a great weekend. We'll meet again soon.
Good afternoon. This is 91.5 WBEZ, 53 degrees, mostly sunny in Chicago. Today, we're going to see temperatures dropping to a low around 37. Stay with us. We have Science Friday straight ahead.
If your phone gets service, then you can get WBEZ.